Coming up next on the better part, we'll have A2Z homeschooling. We're going to be learning the ins and the outs, the ups and the downs of homeschooling. Please join us because the better part starts now.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program that encompasses a diverse spectrum of topics important to our community, which we hope will both inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the program.
Welcome. Today in the studio we have with us Anne Zeise, homeschooling expert and guiding light behind A2Z We're going to be taking a great look at how Anne got started in homeschooling, how she became an expert, some of the frequently asked questions about homeschooling, and some tips and tricks for those of you who would like to follow on and get more information about investigating or even jumping feet first into homeschooling. Welcome, Anne.
Welcome, Sarah.
Glad to have you here today. I hope you didn't have too much trouble finding us.
Not at all.
And we've got a lot to cover in 30 minutes, so let's just jump right in. And could you please tell us just in a few minutes how you got started in homeschooling? What really got you going?
I had heard about this thing called homeschooling, and our son was not thriving in school, and my husband's boss had decided to move his business to Tahoe, and so we were going to have to go back and forth a lot. And so I inquired into homeschooling at the only place I thought to look, which was our school district, and the gal there had a program, and they said, "Sure, here's a whole box of books for you."
Oh, great. They just dumped a bunch of books on you.
Just dumped a bunch of books, appropriate for our son's 4th grade level. So we took him home, and he scuttled off to his room with it. That was a great idea. And in about 2 weeks, he had finished the reader and the health book, I think, and said, "Okay, what's next?"
Oops.
Oops. Well, I was on an American online homeschool forum, and someone said, "Did you know, since you have a credential, you can be your son's tutor and homeschool under the tutoring option?" So there was no paperwork to fill out. I just became his tutor, and we could do anything we wanted, basically.
So when you said you had a credential, were you a teacher already?
Yeah, I'd been a teacher.
Eventually, I think you moved on, and now you have your own website. How did you end up there?
Well, when you first get online, you start making bookmarks. And pretty soon you've got so many bookmarks, they need to be organized. So I started organizing them into topic areas and showing my friends where I had them so they could come and find all these free resources too.
Yeah.
So I began accumulating all these free things, sites for people to educate their kids with. Yes, you'll need to buy some books to supplement these free things, but you can do it on a pretty low-cost basis.
Why do people homeschool?
Families homeschool for all kinds of reasons. Every family you ask will come up with a different answer. In general, it's not one reason, but maybe 2 or 3 reasons that push them over the edge. Often it's something awful is going on at the current situation, and they don't like that. That's why I brought this one book, The Making the Grade. It's wouldn't be all of 5th grade, but if you had to homeschool from a car, and you only carry one book along, you could get a whole lot done and keep pace probably until you got
settled in somewhere. So there's something like that for pretty much every one of the elementary through high school grades?
No, K through 6.
K through 6. Okay.
High school gets a little trickier.
Okay.
People do travel in RVs and homeschool from the RVs, or they homeschool on boats and sometimes sail around the world.
Yeah, you mentioned in some of the correspondence we had that some people, their lifestyle is traveling and they want to take their kids. You've mentioned boats, you've mentioned being kind of homeless and out of work. What are some of the other reasons people might want to be mobile?
Sometimes their job takes them in multiple places all the time. Some entertainers are going to be on set in different places, and they'll homeschool and take their families along with them.
And also, I guess you mentioned missionaries, people on temporary assignments with a regular business.
I'm talking to someone now who's with a startup company, and they're moving because of the startup, and they're going to be starting the business. And then when that gets done, they're moving on to the next locale to start the business and move around a lot. So there are people all over the world in big corporations who are doing that.
One of the things that intrigued me was you said a reason some people homeschool is because of bullying, and it wasn't always because the child is being bullied. Sometimes it's because the child is the bully. How does that work out?
You have a child with, who's acting out and it really needs to be pulled out and straightened up. You might want to consider homeschooling in order to help get that child to fly right.
You just need to make sure you take care of the behavioral issues, and then you're keeping the kid out of the temptation to bully.
Yeah, you can keep on top of it.
What are some of the kind of bizarre or different or unusual reasons people homeschool that you've come across over the years?
Well, sometimes, like, do you think I should homeschool because they're teaching yoga in the schools and it's not Christian? And I'm kind of going like, that's not, there's got to be a whole lot else going on. That's not, that's
so you have to direct them maybe back to their pastor or somebody in their religious environment to help them out with that, or?
The religious people want to homeschool for religious reasons. I usually I show them where the good Christian or Jewish or Islamic resources are to be able to connect for those reasons.
Well, that sounds pretty useful. Does a larger percentage of the homeschooling group do so for religious reasons?
Those who homeschool for religious reasons homeschool are maybe 12% of the population. The others are homeschooling because of other reasons in their life, such as mobility reasons. The academics aren't up to par what they feel is right for their child. Can be for economic reasons. Some people have been sending their kids to private or parochial schools and they can't afford it anymore. So homeschooling is a less expensive alternative to that.
So Anne, does anybody have a handle on how many people in the U.S. are actually homeschooling?
I have a chart of that I've done of the statistics about homeschoolers. There are about 200,000 in the United States.
And that would be on your website too for people to look at.
Right. The problem is both defining homeschooling and counting them, because two big states, Texas and California, don't count homeschoolers, and you can bet there are a lot of children in those two states.
They don't count them at all?
No, they don't keep the statistics.
Wow.
So, and there's a couple of other states that are fairly large that don't collect them either. So we're stuck with the states that have high regulations and count their homeschoolers. And those 7 states are not necessarily representative of the rest of the country, but it's all we have to go on.
Okay.
So we try our best to come up with an idea of how many might homeschool. And then we have a hard time defining the actual homeschoolers. What about the young kids that are being, pre-homeschooled, and the older kids over 16 who are continuing on with their homeschooling, but not they're not part of the count because they're not they're beyond compulsory age.
So it sounds like the numbers are really hidden. It could be 3 or 4 times the 200,000. Nobody really knows. Do you have a sense?
No, but we try to lowball it because we don't want to scare the teachers' unions.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Some are. We don't know whether to count the kids that are a part of a public school program. Say a program called Independent Study is people who are under the control of the school district but studying at home.
So they get specific materials and they're on a test schedule and things like that.
Yeah, they're really not independent at all. They have to do whatever the school tells them to do.
Well, that brings to mind something that I think it might be really interesting to our audience, and that is I know there isn't really, but could you give us a sample of a typical day in a homeschooler's life, and then maybe a typical week for a homeschooling family? Just examples. They don't have to be the one and only.
One time somebody asked me, it was very late at night in Florida. I knew they were from Florida, and it must have been midnight there. And they were saying, do we have to homeschool at the same hours or the schools do? And I said, no, if you learn better from 8 to midnight, you can homeschool at that time and sleep in the morning. I frequently got my website done because I would get up as an early bird. I'd get up at 5 a.m. I'd work till 9 when my son got up, and then we'd do the homeschooling. But I got in 4 hours of work before he woke up. And then we would go off and we'd spend about a bit of time, just getting the basic morning chores done, dishes in, beds made. And we'd then go for maybe 2 hours of some kind of directed lessons.
So you mean at home?
At home. And then we'd go out. We'd go to a homeschool field trips on our own or with the group, or we meet the group at a park and just hang out the rest of the afternoon in a park. And then in the evening, Dad get home, and Dad was in charge of when we got to the higher level math, he did those. That he was in charge of that, and he was often did a lot of the science experiments in the evenings, because it's important to keep Dad somewhat, keep him involved and understanding what you're kind of going through during the day, so he doesn't.
He doesn't think that you're playing all day?
Yeah, that we're goofing off all day.
You're not, though, are you?
No.
Oh, no.
Well, sometimes it looks like goofing off to other people. But, you learn even goofing off.
So it sounds like the whole day is a learning experience, but only a few hours of the day are formal, quote-unquote, book learning. Or working on formal papers. Is that pretty true, or?
There's groups called Unschoolers that would never force their kid to do a math book or go through use worksheets.
Does that work for them, or?
It works for them. They do fine. They wind up leading great lives, doing interesting things.
Wow.
I couldn't quite get that relaxed, but I would kind of throw things in my son's way, or I'd let him figure out how he wanted to learn it. He created the drowning game. We have a pool in our backyard, so I would throw a toy in, a pool toy, and I'd say a math problem, and he'd go dive. His rules: he could dive for the toy and come up with the math answer at the same time.
Wow. He didn't ever stay under too long trying to figure it out.
He was allowed to come up for air, and get a clarification if he needed it. And it was practice math problems. He already knew how to solve them on paper, but he wanted to see if he could do it in his head.
Nice.
Yeah.
And it was so your kid was partly his own teacher.
Yeah. So if the kids can figure out how to make a game of what they're learning, or you can find a practical reason. One time Scott said, why do I have to learn to find the areas of irregular polygons? Who needs that? And I said, okay, let's go wallpaper the bathroom. And we had to find all the area of the irregular polygons of the walls in the bathroom in order to get this done.
Nice.
Figure out how much wallpaper to buy. And that became a project and a lesson in irregular polygon errors.
So as you had told me and warned me, there is no average or typical day. But what about the week in the life of a family that's homeschooling? That would seem a different kind of rhythm.
A lot join these park day groups, and that they usually meet weekly. And then sometimes those groups go on field trips, which might be on another day, where they'll go to a factory, say, or one of the highlights in this area is the Jelly Belly factory tour.
Oh, that sounds like a good one to me.
That's a good one. You might go down to spend the whole day in Monterey, going to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. You might go to San Francisco to the Exploratorium. We usually try to do one big field trip a week. So compared to a school that might do, 2 field trips a year because of budget concerns. homeschoolers quickly figure out if you buy family membership at one of these museums, you get a discount at all the other ones that are within their system. And
Good.
so you figure that out. You figure out which one you can get into the cheapest, and then you can go to all the others. And then you go into their shop afterwards, and you buy some, like a science museum store can be a great place to pick up science curriculum, as it were.
Yep.
History museum, a good place to pick up history books. And
boy, there's a whole world out there. It sounds like living in real life outside of school is actually a great learning experience.
yeah.
Well, along with that, who is responsible for the homeschooling? Is there somebody held responsible by a system, or is there the big homeschooling God up there somewhere?
No.
No?
No, we're not like the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts. There's no hierarchy. Parents are in charge, and what associations we have are kind of in charge of making sure the parents stay in charge and helping us find resources for homeschooling. And they have, in Santa Clara, coming up in about the 1st of August, there's going to be a big Homeschool California conference. There will be lots of speakers and a vendor hall. There'll be a separate teen conference where the teens get together and have all kinds of activities and fun things to do. There'll be areas for the middle-aged kids, and there'll be places for the littler ones too, to have some hands-on things to do.
We're coming up on the end of our discussion today, but before we dive into some tips and tricks, I wanted to ask you briefly, how do homeschoolers deal with special events like proms or sporting experiences or things of that sort?
We used the resources in the community for sports. Our son went to a rock climbing center and learned how to do competitive rock climbing, which was a great fun. He joined a swim team and did swimming with them. So there's soccer with the soccer teams in the area. So whatever is around, you make use of that for the sport. The centers, the roller skating or the ice skating centers, gymnastic centers. One friend of ours got into fencing, and her child later went on to the Olympics, and she won a bronze in the saber.
Wow.
Just because that was the closest PE resource that they had.
So it was random. She wasn't necessarily particularly interested, huh?
Well, interested enough that to get involved in it, but it's just it kind of grows from that. The kids find these things and they get a lot of chance to practice. As far as getting the theater groups, if they're concerned with theater.
So on and on.
On and on.
Whatever's out there in the community, there's a way to get involved.
Yeah.
Well, this is fascinating. I wish we could talk for hours, but we can't. So what little tips and tricks do you have for people who want to find resources to help them with investigating homeschooling a little more, or even starting to homeschool right away? What do you suggest?
Please come to A2Z, that's with a numeral 2, homeschooling.com. I've got everything they need on that site to find how to begin, to find resources, find free resources, find resources if they want to pay for them. There's books, there's home study programs if you want to go with one of those. And all kinds of resources that anybody's ever asked me a question, I probably have the answer to it there.
You once told me you have over 1,000 pages on your website. Is that really true?
Probably 1,400.
Oh, but nobody's counting?
Well, we just moved the site from an old HTML site to this new WordPress site, so we got pretty aware of how much we were moving.
Oh my goodness. That must have been a real chore just to move all that information.
And then do it right. So I won't go into the technicalities, but every once in a while we'd drag the system down. It'd be too slow. We had to figure out how to make it go faster.
Yeah. Well, in these last few minutes, can you give us an idea of what are some of the outstanding challenges people meet in getting into homeschooling? The benefits are kind of more obvious, but there must be a lot of obstacles to people who want to homeschool.
Sometimes working, if both parents need to work, it can be hard. Or you have to decide to go back, and maybe the parent that's making the most money stays working, and the other parent, which might be the father, stays home with the kids. Some people start their own business at home. I've had friends who are realtors who, since they were home-based anyway, that worked for them.
What about the school systems? You said some states are more strict than others. Are there obstacles in working with the school systems?
Most have learned now most of the school systems have, if they're involved, have figured out how to work it.
Is it because they are glad they don't have to spend the extra money on another kid in the schoolroom?
They have there's actually been studies that the school districts have more money if some of their students in the district go homeschool. People thought that it would have less money for some reason because it would be fewer seat bodies, but that hasn't.
They have a
proven
smaller
true.
head count, for one
They
thing.
have a smaller head count. Some will allow the students to come into the schools for certain classes. Our high school, at the high school level, allowed homeschoolers to come in and take 2 or 4 classes. If you were 6, you were a full-time student. But they could drop in. And our son dropped in he wanted to learn AutoCAD, and I couldn't figure out how to teach him that.
So that's one of the computer programs for designing things?
Yes. And then when he got good at it, he wanted to keep doing it. So we enrolled him in the junior college, the community college.
How old was he then?
15.
Oh, that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
So that brings up an interesting point. As far as testing for admissions and other things to show that your child has accomplished what is needed, how do you go about that as a homeschooler?
Well, at the community college level, they just they would do placement testing to get them in the right course for math, English, and a foreign language.
Oh, okay.
So if you need a placement,
you don't have to pass an entrance exam or show an SAT score or something like that.
Not for community college.
Not for community college.
No one does. If you wanted to homeschool all the way through high school and go to college, colleges like to see SAT or ACT course tests, so you can plan and take those. But our son wanted to, because he had the community college credits, he didn't need the tests to go and continue to a 4-year university.
So he went on and left home and went to the University of Hawaii, didn't he? Yeah.
And he just went on the basis of his transcript from the community college.
Wow, sounds like you managed to skip a lot of headaches and expenses.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of impressed. I don't hear that you're actually required to do a lot of the periodic testing that's required in the public school systems to prove to yourself or to other people that you're doing what needs to be done.
No. The STAR tests that are in the schools are for the schools to be able to get state funding. The scores come back too late to help a child. The schools don't get feedback for about a year. So they can't help an individual student based on those tests. But the schools will get money based on those tests scores. So we're not accepting any money from any of these from the state. So we don't need to prove it. We don't need to test. Schools test to prove to parents that they're teaching too, and the parent already knows how the child is doing. So if they don't.
Yeah, you're up close and personal.
You're up close and personal, and you don't let the kid. Don't let it skip. If a kid is not getting something, you keep at it until they get it, and then you move on.
So you don't have to hold them back a grade or move them up a grade, or if they get sick, you can just let them stay home till they get well.
We don't grade them. They're not apples. They're not eggs. You buy grade A apples or
eggs or whatever.
But the kids, our son, his handwriting is probably still at about a 3rd grade level, and but other things have
it's the digital
moved on.
age,
It's the digital age. He taught himself to keyboard, and if keyboarding is fast keyboarding is important these days, that's what he does.
That's what he does.
What he learned.
Wow.
You can be tested. Some homeschoolers who want to get involved in gifted programs, for example, might want to get their kids to be certified gifted. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, if they have a learning disability, and it would help to have that learning disability be kind of certified, so you can get some assistance you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But unless you have a need for a service,
Mm-hmm.
there's not much point in standardized testing.
Right. So if you had one thing you'd like our viewers to take away today about homeschooling, how you'd like them to think about homeschooling, what would that be?
You can do it. And I often finish letters to people who are feeling a little discouraged with, you can do this.
So, as I understood from what you were saying, and again, some of the discussions we've had, you don't have to know everything. You just have to find ways to find the resources or the people you need to teach your child things that you don't know, or that your child wants to learn that you didn't even know existed, never mind the regular stuff. Is that pretty fair?
Yeah. One person pointed out, a very smart woman I know, said, I think every adult that I run into knows something I don't know, and could teach my child something. So we've had the vet give our son a lesson in the life cycle of a flea.
Oh, really?
We went to the water treatment center to learn about where it went when we flushed. There's always something out there. Going into the movie theater to find out how the movies are projected is fun. We went to DevCon, the big construction guy, and they said, no one ever has a field trip here. And we learned how big buildings were built. So there's plenty of resources out there, plenty of people willing to share their knowledge.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your experience. I know people are going to want to go to your website, and I understand now why you have 1,400 pages. That's just not even touching the tip of the iceberg with all the experience and knowledge you have. So thank you again for sharing with us, and I hope our viewers are going to get a lot out of this. I certainly did.
Thank you.
We hope you found that as interesting and engaging as we did. Please join us next time for another episode of The Better Part. Meanwhile, check out some of our previous episodes on YouTube.